Hi.
All right, I am going to share. And Kerri, I did share sound, so I think we're good.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. I'll just start by welcoming you all and thank you, Brittany, for kicking us off with that introduction. Again, my name is Kerri Mitchell. I'm English faculty and an instructional coach at Front Range Community College. I'm also the co-developer and co-facilitator of something called the Active Learning Institute that I collaborate with Eric on.
And that's me, Eric Salahub, philosophy faculty at Front Range Community College. I've also worked as an instructional coach, both on the campus and for online learning. And we are very, very glad that you're all here with us today. I guess we can just jump right in. We will share this slide at the end of the presentation as well. We are welcoming anyone to reach out to us if you want to hear more about what we're doing or share ideas. We would love to hear from you in the chat or by email later.
So we have identified a few outcomes for this session. We want to take this hour with you today to explore why equity gaps for underrepresented minoritized students exist in higher education. We want to consider our role as teachers in what can we do to help resolve these gaps, and examine some strategies that have been shown to decrease or even eliminate, for some people, these gaps for these particular students. And we're going to be doing this through the lens of active learning, which is the work that we're passionate about and that we've been engaged in for the last 5 or so years.
Joan, in the chat, if you want to talk to me offline about instructional coaching, that is something we're doing here at Front Range Community College. It's rare in colleges or universities, but Kerri and I would be happy to talk about our instructional coaching program, but we don't have time to do it right now. So we're going to just jump in by looking at an excerpt from an article called "Traditional Teaching May Deepen Inequality." And we're just going to look at these first 3 paragraphs. And I'm going to actually ask for 3 volunteers to each read one of these paragraphs. And so I guess we're going to call this a popcorn read. And if someone is willing to take a risk, just unmute yourself and read the first paragraph and then stop. And then someone else can jump in and read the second paragraph. And so I will just pause and hopefully someone will help us out here.
I'll go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yes, go for it. Thank you so much.
Kelly A. Hogan had no reason to think anything was wrong with her teaching. She had been hired at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill as part of a push to bring in teaching-oriented professors who would improve undergraduate education. And on the face of it, Hogan was delivering on expectations. She received glowing course evaluations from students who complimented her teaching style.
Awesome. Thank you, Wade.
You're welcome.
All right, then about a decade ago, a colleague who was researching large courses, including Bio 101, from which Hot taught, half of the section shared some troubling data. About 1 in 14 white students earned a D or F in the course. About 1 in 7 Latino A students received those grades. For Black students, which was 1 in 3.
Thank you. One more risk taker out there. Want to read the last paragraph for us?
I can go. For Hogan, seeing the data felt like a punch in the gut. To make matters worse, she knew that introductory biology, which she taught to majors and non-majors alike, was a gateway course. Students who got a D or an F in it were awfully unlikely to continue in STEM fields. Suddenly, the underrepresentation of minorities in the sciences wasn't some far-off phenomenon. It was something her own biology course, which she had labored over and taught to some 3,000 students by that point, was contributing to.
Excellent. Thank you so much for helping us out here. I will share a copy of this paper in the chat a little bit later, but we're going to come back to this. If I can advance the slides. And so I guess I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions, and feel free to mull these over privately. If you want to use the chat, you're certainly welcome. So do you know the C or better pass rates for the students in your classes? That's really what Hogan was dealing with, really thinking about success rates or pass rates. So do you know what your pass rates are in your classes? And you're already anticipating me here. And so Hogan's thinking about not just pass rates and success rates, but she's looking at it through this equity lens. Have you done that? Have you looked at or thought about your pass rates through this disaggregated equity lens? And again, feel free to share, but it's okay if you just want to ponder these things. Yes, Emily, it can be extremely eye-opening. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, you never know. That's what fun thing about data. You never know what you're going to find until you look at it. And so we are going to look at some CCS pass rate data. And before we look at the slide, I'm just going to ask you to predict what we're going to see. What do you think we're going to see when we look at some disaggregated pass rate data for CCS, for all of us? And I will pause momentarily, and then I'll show you our data, and we can take a look at that for a moment. Interesting, Joan. I'll just say, anyone out there who's interested in looking at disaggregated data for your classes, it should be something that you have access to. Maybe not easily, because often this is something that maybe needs to be mediated through a discussion with an equity committee or something. But if you want this data and you can't get it, reach out to me. Maybe I can help you strategize.
A few people are making predictions, it looks like, in the chat, Eric. So
we're just gonna pause on this slide for 60 seconds, and we're not going to dig into the data, but this is our CCS course pass rate data for the last 5 years, and I will just let you ponder it. If you see something that jumps out that you find interesting or intriguing and you want to jot it in the chat, that is fine.
Joan, good question. Does that include online classes? Do we know, Eric?
I don't know. I am thinking this does, but I don't know. And so Kerri and I are not experts on this data, but asking these questions is really interesting. And so I'm going to suggest if you're interested in this kind of data, it's definitely worth finding an avenue to dig into it. Kerri and I are not experts on data, but I think most of us can probably take away, well, I think there's a takeaway in here for us. There are definitely some gaps in our success rates.
So we could definitely spend a lot of time looking at data and really digging into it and continuing to ask and explore these great questions that are coming up in the chat. But we really just wanted to give you a quick glimpse of this data just to illustrate the point that these equity gaps do exist across the CCCS system, just like in Hogan's classes and quite possibly in your classes too. It's just something that we're seeing, and it is in line with national trends as well. So we would ask you to take about 2 minutes right now, and you can do this either in the chat or privately if you want to jot down some ideas for yourself. And we'd like you to speculate on why you think these gaps exist. Maybe you've already studied this or looked into this and you have some informed guesses, and maybe you really are just guessing at this point. Either is fine. So go ahead and jot down a few ideas for yourself. Why do these gaps exist? Why do you think they exist? And we will stop talking for 2 minutes to give you a chance to ponder that. Just want to thank those of you who are sharing in the chat thoughts about economic status, students who are not getting language support, the design of our teaching, lack of connection to the relevance in students' lives, sense of belonging or not feeling welcome, different ways of accessing information, instructor and subjects, tons of great stuff in here. So continue to take about 30 more seconds to generate in the chat or privately some ideas that you have about why these gaps might exist.
All right, I am going to open some breakout rooms. You're probably going to have 4 or 5 people in your breakout rooms since there are like 50 some of us here. We're going to give you about 8 minutes to discuss with some colleagues. Kerri, do you want to add more to that?
Yeah, sure. So in your rooms, we'd like you to just share out, talk about what the reasons were that you came up with, and then see if you can add to the list that you have some of the ideas that other people in your group have. And then we'll come back together and we'll take a couple minutes to see if we can add more to the chat than what's already there. So you can go ahead and join that room once you see it, the window pop up inviting you.
Everyone should see your breakout room. Ooh, I didn't mean to move my slides.
Eric, I'm glad you did 4 because I was in a room and some people are not maybe logged in, but not able to join a room because they're
Assigning, there's someone else. Okay. A couple people haven't joined. So if you're out there and you haven't joined, you should see a breakout room that you can get into.
Thank you. Sorry, I had a little fire.
That is
No
totally
problem.
okay. Totally okay.
So Eric, we're thinking like maybe 106 to come out. I don't
Yeah.
know. Okay.
I had 105, but either way. I know time goes so fast once the Zoom starts. It's
Crazy. My students are so worried because they're doing these 8 to 10 minute talks and they're like, that is such a long time. And I keep trying to tell them, you know, actually, when you get up there, you're going to probably wish you had 5 more minutes.
Desi, I see you're out there, not in a room. It is totally okay if you don't want to join a room. I just wanted to let you know if you're listening and you can't get into your breakout room, let me know. And the same thing for Rebecca.
And Michelle as well.
Yes, yes.
It's okay if you don't want to go into
it. Is
But
fine.
again,
I don't
need
want you to
help,
be stranded out there.
in technology land.
Brittany, what do you do for CCCS?
By trade, I am a librarian, but I manage OER for the system.
Oh, that makes sense. Since
yeah, so I've created about 95 OER courses, 5Z degrees, and now I'm running the consolidation of the 13 community college system libraries into one library.
Wow.
So
well, as online teachers who have our students use library databases, I can see why that's a big job.
Yeah, yeah. I've taught a few times, but for college in Illinois. I like to keep my teaching and my peers at CCC Online separate. You know, there's also no LTA programs. I teach in a library technical assistant program. There's no LTA programs out here, so
yeah.
But I work with the instructional design team here. It's really, I mean, CCC Online does the course design, the way that they have the setup, I think really nice, where they kind of put the librarian, the faculty, the department chair kind of all together. I really like how they.
AV
process
just joined us. I'm going to send AV. I'm going to send you off to a breakout room. You can just jump right in with them.
Sorry about
Yes,
that, Brittany.
Oh no.
Yeah, I just canceled and I joined again. I had some issues with my Zoom. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. I'm gonna join now for
I
this.
probably did not put you back in the room you were in, but that's okay.
That's okay. I'm joining for this room. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. I know it would be nice if there was a way in Zoom that if someone was in a room and they logged back in, it would remember, because it's easy with my class when it's small, but with 60 people, I did not know who was in which room.
Yeah. I have to say I'm pleasantly, I don't want to say surprised, but I guess surprised with how many folks have joined our meetings today. I was laughing at the
Agreed.
fact that we're hosting an equity conference on 2 religious holidays.
Right. Right. Oh my gosh, I hadn't even thought about
I
it.
I am not
it hadn't
religious, so
occurred to
it
me
wasn't a thing
either.
for me, but I did find it a little entertaining when I laughed. I'm not gonna lie. We do have a habit of doing that with the system office.
Well, yeah.
So I
I'm
was thrilled with
surprised.
the number of participants that we have.
Yeah, I'm surprised and heartened by how many people are attending the conference, because we're just seeing such levels of burnout and exhaustion that it's neat to see that people are still finding time for professional development.
And there was a lot of energy in the room at the keynote this morning. So
So cool.
it's very cool. All right, two minutes. And we've got people from across the system too, which is awesome.
That's really neat to see. Community College of Denver, Arapahoe. What's OC? Otero?
Yeah, okay.
Cool.
I'm guessing. And then there's a few mystery guests that don't have their school. So.
I tried. I did put a few a note in there saying, please put your
Yes, thank you. I saw that. That's awesome.
I only noticed one S number, so that wasn't,
I could just officially change my name to my S number, like one of those rock stars, and,
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Kerri, I'm hitting close. That'll give everyone 1 minute to come back.
Sounds great.
All right, we'll debrief with this slide. I will move to the next slide.
Thanks, Eric.
Now we'll see how much people are talking and how long it takes, if people take their full time or if they're gonna.
Right. So it's an interesting experiment.
Well, welcome back, those of you who are back out of your breakout rooms. I think if some of our colleagues are going to wait until the last minute until their room closes on them.
It's wild that some of you are on my campus and I see you for the first time this semester in a little box at a statewide conference.
Noelle, we're looking at you.
Hi, Noelle.
So true.
What a world we're living in when.
Yeah,
I'm going to come over to where you guys are.
Welcome back, everybody. I was heartened to know that many of the groups stayed in until you were literally hauled out of your breakout room. So thank you for speculating and taking some risks and talking about possible reasons for these gaps.
So we know it's always a little disruptive when you're probably in the midst of a great conversation to have that, that hook come and pull you off the stage. And so we apologize for that, but thank you for taking a little bit of time to collaborate and share your ideas. We already have some great stuff in the chat, but if you don't mind taking a minute and maybe adding a new thought, something that you learned in talking with your group, maybe another reason why you think these gaps exist, it'd be great to get a few more ideas in the chat here. I'll just give you about 30 seconds to think about that and do that.
Thank you, Susan. Joan.
Thanks, Joan. Yeah. Yes, thank you, Kerri and Sherry. Thank you. What I love about these comments is that some of these overlap and some of you are saying things that came up earlier, but you're saying them in a new way, which I find really impactful. Yeah, losing them in the pipeline to our disciplines.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for that as well.
Right.
Chuck, thanks for being honest with that. Maybe some of us are looking for ways to punish students. So I appreciate the risk taking and speculating with this activity.
Thanks, Noelle, for digging deep there and looking at maybe some of the psychology and what students believe about themselves. Yeah, lack of help navigating the system. These are all really thoughtful responses. Thank you all for taking some time to think about the complex and varied reasons for why certain populations of our students may struggle in this learning environment. So we're going to dig back in to another part of the Supiano essay, and we will ask for 2 more volunteers to read these next 2 paragraphs. And I'll just stop talking here so that somebody can go ahead and take a risk and jump in.
College students aren't blank slates. They have spent years acquiring an excellent education or a crummy one. They have been encouraged by the adults in their lives, or they have been undermined. Long before they arrive on campus, they have the assurance that the world is theirs for the taking, or the knowledge that their intelligence and worth will be questioned at every turn because of where they come from or what their parents do or the color of their skin.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Nina. All right, one more volunteer for this last paragraph.
So perhaps another professor might have chalked up the racial gaps in Biology 101 to these existing and seemingly inevitable inequities, but Hogan saw it differently. These gaps, she thought, were her problem. Inequality has plenty of time to fester in the 18 years or so it takes to get to college. But the way undergraduates are usually taught, Hogan is now convinced, makes it even worse. Reducing the disparities in Biology 101, Hogan believed was her responsibility.
Fantastic, Rhonda. Thank you both so much for reading those 2 bits. And now we're going to follow up with a question.
So as you just read, Hogan, she says these equity gaps are her problem and that reducing the disparities in the pass rates is her responsibility. I'd just like you to take a moment to ponder that. And if you're willing, you can certainly add something to the chat. What does she mean when she says it's her problem? And why does she say that? And so if you want to entertain her idea, what do you think she means when she says it's her problem and her responsibility?
Thank you, Rhonda. Somebody has to step up and take responsibility, right? Yeah, Wade, because she can make changes to address it. She may not be the reason why some of those problems exist in the first place, but she is in a position to help. Thanks, Nina. Reflect on her own teaching, see what she can do.
Wow, now the chat's going so fast, I can't keep up with it.
Thanks, Johanna. We're all here to create the best learning opportunity for students. So thank you. That's really nicely said.
Yeah, Monica, we have a significant amount of power and control of what happens in our classroom. And so that gives us some responsibility.
And Emily, that it becomes our responsibility, because if we continue teaching the status quo, we're just contributing to the problem.
Yeah, Lisa, looking at this as a failure and something that she can do better at, accepting that responsibility. Maybe she's gauging her quality as a teacher based on what students are learning. And so this may seem like a failure that she can improve on.
Susan, thanks for this comment. It shifts the blame from the student and gives the teacher an opportunity to take responsibility for it, which seems like a healthier approach than just blaming the student for what we may perceive as deficits. We could keep going. There are so many great comments in here, but we're gonna drive on because we only have an hour with you all. But thank you for your contributions.
So I think everything that's coming out of the chat, yeah, Chuck, thank you for that. There's really two ways, at least, to think about these gaps. We can think about them as success gaps, which I think has been the way we've thought about these for decades. And in fact, I will just admit, until 2 or 3 years ago, I had never heard the phrase opportunity gaps. And in fact, when I heard someone use it, I actually had to pause during a meeting and ask for clarity on what this person meant. And I think we are already on this. If we're thinking about these gaps as success gaps, we are conceiving of them as something that is based in the student, right? Something that's intractable, some kinds of factors that are, I don't know, innate or so foundational or so fundamental that there's just nothing we can do about it as the teacher, right? This is the problem of the student. And it's, they're responsible for their success, and this is on them. And an opportunity gap really reframes this to say that these gaps are based on situational factors, contextual factors that a teacher may in fact have a lot of ability to impact through course design and pedagogy. And so Kerri and I use the phrase opportunity gaps for all the reasons that we were seeing in the chat. And so I can't help but now think about, this idea of an equity lens, and the language that we use is really important. Maybe I don't know how often we talk about these things with students, but when we talk about these issues with ourselves and with our colleagues, I think the phrase opportunity gaps much better gets at what is going on. So we have these gaps. And that's a problem. Hogan thought it was a problem. I think we're all here because we see it as a problem. And I know one of the reasons you're here today in the session is maybe there's some solutions that teachers can actually impact in the classroom. And Kerri and I are going to suggest that active learning design and pedagogy is at least one part of the solution to closing or eliminating these gaps.
So what happens with Hogan's situation and her experiment? You can read the whole article. We will give you access to it. But in brief, here's what happened. Hogan's students performed better across the board with a new design. It was particularly beneficial for groups who'd gotten disproportionate levels of D's and F's before. The gap between Black and white students was cut in half. And another gap between first and continuing generation students was closed. And so when she used these active learning interventions, she was able to make an enormous impact on that opportunity gap. This isn't just happening in Hogan's class. There is a lot of really promising research right now emerging that's looking at active learning course design and what impact that has on URM students. And so in this second box, we're referring to a 2020 meta-analysis from the journal PNAS that was titled Active Learning Narrows Achievement Gaps for Underrepresented Students in Undergraduate Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. And here's what they found. On average, active learning reduced achievement gaps in exam scores by 33% and pass rates by 45%. So this is really crucial. These are huge numbers. And even though it says science, technology, engineering, and math, Eric and I would argue that this is possible in any discipline. It's just that the STEM fields have more money to conduct these research projects and really sort of measure it. And so I just want to emphasize this last sentence as well, that active learning benefits all students, but offers disproportionate benefits for individuals from underrepresented groups. And we'll talk about why in a little bit. I do see this comment in the chat Mark, thanks for asking, what is active learning? We're going to try to give you a sense of that through this session today, and we would invite you to reach out to us for more if we whet your appetite. So one other thing that I just want to point to is that there's been a ton of research in the field of pedagogy and active learning over many years, and these are just a couple of meta-analyses that show that yes, active learning works for all students. So by using active learning techniques in your class, you're not suddenly privileging other groups of students while disadvantaging other groups of students. Everybody benefits from an active learning approach. And it's also the case that students who come from these underrepresented and minoritized areas are also benefiting more.
And so just if you want to get another way to think about this, don't just take our word for it, or even that meta-analysis, which you can definitely look up. This is a clip from another article, and this one's called Traditional Teaching May Deepen Inequality. We'll also post this to the chat in a few minutes, but I'm just going to read. This is the beginning of this article. In a typical college course, students hear dozens of lectures. They might be assigned hundreds of pages of reading. Then they're asked to demonstrate their understanding of what all the information adds up to in a handful of high-stakes papers or exams. How they should prepare for those papers or tests is a matter usually left to the student. The arrangement works well for those whose high schools provided strong preparation or who are comfortable asking professors for help when they need it, traits that have as much to do with privilege as anything else. Students without those advantages, though, can flounder, not because they can't do the work, but because no one has taught them how to navigate the system.
So Eric, before jumping to the next slide, on that slide, I think maybe just to answer Mark's question a little bit here, we're going to define active learning in contrast to what we think is the dominant paradigm in higher education, which is the transmission of knowledge paradigm, which is usually characterized by the traditional lecture that we see happen in a lot of courses. And so this is just one example from the article of why lectures seem to be contributing to some of these gaps that we're seeing. Eric, if you want to flip. Okay, so here's another clip from an article called Our College Lectures Unfair. This was from the New York Times, 2015. And so I'll just read this excerpt for you. Does the college lecture discriminate? Is it biased against undergraduates who are not white, male, and affluent? The notion may seem absurd on its face. The lecture is an old and well-established tradition in education. To most of us, it simply is the way college courses are taught. Even online courses are largely conventional lectures that are uploaded to the web. Yet a growing body of evidence suggests that the lecture is not generic or neutral, but a specific cultural form that favors some people while discriminating against others, including women, minorities, and low-income and first-generation college students. This is not a matter of instructor bias. It is the lecture format itself, when used on its own without any other instructional supports, that offers unfair advantages to an already privileged population.
I'll just address Nina's question. Kerri and I are certainly happy to talk about different kinds of lectures. We definitely do that. I don't think it's one thing. I think both of these articles are really referring to what we're going to call the transmission of knowledge paradigm, an entire way of thinking about teaching and learning that the lecture is just kind of the hallmark trait of. And so definitely there's a place for lecture, but this is more referring to the way the entire dynamic is structured.
So before you flip to the next slide,
Sorry.
I just want to say that these are challenging 1 hour sessions for us because Eric and I actually developed an entire active learning institute where we take participants through about 30 hours of guided training on what active learning is and how to design for active learning. So to pare this stuff down to a 1 hour presentation, it's really, really challenging for us to do. And so we're going to share with you some of the strategies that we have found to be really useful from the active learning paradigm. And these are also in line with some of the strategies that get mentioned in both of these articles that we didn't go through in full with you today, but that will give you access to. So we're really just highlighting some of the key active learning strategies that can help eliminate some of these gaps. But please understand that we do not think that a 1-hour session with a few tips and tricks is a sufficient way to bring everybody into the active learning paradigm. And so having said that, here are a few things that we think that teachers ought to focus on. So the first one piece of advice is talk less during class.
Yeah, Kerri, and before you talk less, anyone who was there for the keynote might see some connections between these strategies and the things Dr. Wood was talking about. I'll also add that Kerri and I did most of this research, going back 7 or 8 years. We weren't really thinking about equity. And so these are all research-based instructional strategies. And so I think it's interesting that, in this context, they are inclusive teaching strategies.
So this first one, talk less during class. Well, that speaks right to the slides that we looked at that were criticizing the lecture mode. This is our favorite, I think, active learning quote. The person who does the work does the learning comes from Dr. Terry Doyle, who wrote Learned Center Teaching. And this is really what it all boils down to for us. If we are up there doing the work, doing the talking, making the connections, giving the examples, telling the stories, doing the synthesis, using the higher order thinking skills, we're doing a heck of a lot of learning, and our students are passively sitting there. And just because we're covering that information doesn't mean that anything is firing in their brain or allowing them to be active in constructing their own information. So we need to think about design through a lens of us doing less of that heavy lifting at the front of the class, and really design situations for our students to do more of that heavy lifting, because the person who does the work does the learning.
You could also really see how talking less shifts the entire power dynamic and the power structure of the typical classroom, which, based on everything from the architecture of the building to everything else, is typically aimed at the front of the room where the teacher is standing. And so when you're talking less, that means the focus is really on the students. And so I guess I won't call this a tip, but another thing you might think about is moving the content acquisition part of the class out of the classroom and making that homework, or what Kerri and I would call pre-work. We know the stuff that you lecture on is really important. That's why you're lecturing on it, right? It is the content, it is what you care about, it is what you love. We are not denying that students need to acquire and learn the content. We're just suggesting, and the research suggests, that asking students to acquire the content before they come to class, or to struggle with the content before they come to class, allows you to talk less during class, for one thing, and opens up time for all kinds of other activities that will actually engage students as learners. And so anytime you can move material either to a video lecture or actually ask students to read the textbook or things like that, that may help you actually free up time in class to do something else that may be more impactful for learning.
And so when you free up that time in class, you can think about, how do I want to get students to be engaging their ideas, making their own connections, using more groups and peer collaboration in class. And again, this comes back to design, because we know that just putting students in groups and asking them to collaborate is not always effective. They don't always have the tools to do that. And so we need to design situations, we need to design prompts, we need to design deliverables, things that we actually want students to do very intentionally and carefully, to kind of allow so that we can guide that process of them making those important connections and learning from each other in class.
Use content and activities that allow students to make authentic connections. Dr. Wood talked about actually letting students connect with the material, and there are various ways to do that. But some of us, I think, are so locked into the content that we have in our class. An active learning paradigm really thinks more about the learning outcomes of the class. What do we want students to be able to do when they leave the class? What kinds of skills? How would those skills cash out in the real world or in another class? And so if we're thinking about outcomes, that may free us up to switch out our content. That might be more something that students connect with more. So if you're interested in culturally relevant curriculum, or infusing your class with curriculum that might be more relevant to your students, you're going to have to free yourself up maybe from the particular content that you're using now. And to really think about how is a student going to connect up the knowledge that they're learning in your class with everything else they know? So active learning is really aligned with this constructivist perspective of learning. Knowledge may exist in an island in someone's brain, but if it's an island, they are not going to be able to recall that information and use it in different situations, which is probably what we want as teachers. And so helping a student make meaningful connections, allowing students to connect with the content and the activities is critical. And again, if we've changed our dynamic in the classroom and we're not talking as much, we actually have time to do some of these things.
I'll just add to that point, Eric, about connections, that before we did the research, I think that Eric and I used to privilege our own connections between the sources in our class and the connections that we'd want students to make. And so when we would ask students to share, we were looking for certain answers. We were looking for certain connections. And we've since realized in doing this research that any connection is a good connection because it's a building block for students to learn from. Even if it's a misconception, it's still a place where we can intervene and help students start to build their understanding in the right way. We used to basically say, like, you know, that's an unhelpful connection. Well, that's not true. There's not unhelpful connections.
Yeah, and I know you all know this because our connections are based on the things we know and care about, and they're probably not the same things that our students know and care about.
Quizzing to mastery, quizzing to fluency is another technique that you can use. Eric and I have really relied on this in our online classes. And so when we want students to do meaningful things with the content in the course, we ask them to quiz as many times as they can, to practice over and over with the course concepts, so that by the time we want them to do something more cognitively challenging with those concepts, they've already gained a basic understanding of what those are. We're not using quizzing as a summative assessment. We're using it as a formative tool. In fact, some people even take the word quizzing out of it entirely since it has connotations for students. And you might say something like, practicing with fluency, or, I'm trying to think of some of the words we've used, Derek, to.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they're called quests instead of quizzes, or, again, thinking about how the language, the word quiz is loaded, and students see the word quiz, they think it's about getting the right answer. This is really changing that dynamic and thinking about how can we use quizzes as a study tool? How can we give quizzes to help students actually do metacognition, to challenge their fluency fallacy? Students can only come to class knowing something if they actually have that ability to do that kind of self-assessment. Some students can already do that, right? They come out of high school, they're really good at knowing what they know and what they don't know. Not every student comes pre-prepared to do that. And so these activities that really help students build metacognition and self-assessment skills while they're actually gaining currency with the content can be extremely powerful. I think many of us know students are willing to talk about things whether they've done the reading or not, but the conversation can be much more productive, and students can feel like they belong in the class and be willing to participate when they actually know before they get to class that they have some currency with the content.
Eric, in one of the two articles, I think it might have been the Supiano one, quizzing to fluency was the major intervention that was used. And I think that students improved by 50% when that single intervention was employed.
Yes, it was in one or both of those articles. Another strategy, consider moving away from high stakes performance-based assessments. And again, Dr. Wood mentioned this morning. Maybe you're still teaching a class, and if you're not, you know what we're talking about, with 2 midterms and a final, or 1 midterm and a final, or one huge research paper that's worth 75% of the grade. An active learning strategy and an inclusive teaching strategy and equity-minded strategy is to move away from high stakes performance-based assessments. High stakes has to do with how much the grade rides on one exam or one assessment. Performance-based really gets at this idea that you get one chance to prove what you know. And, we can move away from those. We can move away from high stakes simply by adding more assessments that are worth less each. We can move away from performance-based by allowing or expecting students to actually make revisions or corrections. And so both of these are strategies that have been shown in the research to drive student learning, to improve learning, and definitely it can lower the stress in class. You know, one of the things that Dr. Wood talked about was, you know, this idea of stereotype threat. Some students have been told because of stereotypes that you aren't good at math or something like that. And so that high stakes one-shot assessment can really raise these cognitive biases that actually mean that students don't do as well. And this is one way we can actually help students combat their own cognitive biases simply by moving away from high stakes performance-based assessments.
For us, practice is absolutely key in thinking about building a more equitable classroom and just helping students overall be successful. Oftentimes in our assessments, we ask students to do very cognitively complex tasks. And we wrongly make the assumption, because we covered stuff in class, that somehow that translates to them being able to do complex things with those concepts in our class. And so are we really giving our students the practice that they need to be able to demonstrate the outcomes that we're expecting on whatever those bigger assessments are? It's not enough just to go over the material or to give students exposure to the material. They need to be able to see what the skills are that are involved, whatever those assessments are, and they need time to practice them, and they need to get feedback along the way on how they're doing. We all know through the process of learning in our own lives how important trial and error is, and yet we don't tend to build trial and error into our classes. We often give students one shot at doing something, and we often don't guide them through the practice. We talk about things in class and send them home to do the practice on their own. So we're not really giving them that guided feedback that they need during that mucky process of learning, so that they can trial, get feedback, make changes, and try again and do better.
Help students develop a growth mindset. I am confident that almost all of you are familiar with this idea of fixed versus growth mindsets from Dr. Carol Dweck from Stanford, but I will reiterate it for everyone who knows. And if you're not aware of this or unsure, I'll hit you with this. You know, in a fixed mindset, students believe that their basic abilities, intelligence, and talents are fixed traits. You know, this is the person that thinks I'm smart or I'm not smart, or I'm a math person or not a math person, that I have some kind of innate limits to what I can learn or what I could be good at. And I am confident that many of us have been here, or we have fixed mindsets in some aspects of our lives. I will say this student can be a high performing student, right? Who thinks that they're smart. But if they think their smartness is based on a fixed trait, then they're really going to be wary of doing anything that would showcase a mistake, right? And so this is a very risk-averse student, or it's a student that says, what, why bother practicing? Because if I can't do something, then there's no point in wasting my time trying. I think what the science shows is that we should all have growth mindsets. We can learn, we can develop our skills through the right kind of practice when we get feedback, when we persevere. And so helping students realize that those beliefs that they have about their own limitations are not true based on science. And if we actually help students understand how their brains work, how memories are formed, how neural networks form. And we actually inculcate this into our class, right? Not just saying this, but designing classes around the idea of giving students practice, of encouraging risk-taking and making mistakes and learning over time and revising and iterating their learning. This can go a long way to helping all students learn. And you can imagine, you know, students who have a fixed mindset, this can make a huge difference in their learning. I will just say, since we're all here as teachers, I think we also need to have growth mindsets about ourselves, right? That we can do better if we practice and persevere.
So this slide just kind of pulls all of these ideas together into one place. We would invite you just to kind of look these over and to ponder for a moment which of these things you're already doing, and maybe which of these things you would be willing to try or think about including, or maybe spend some more time thinking about and building into your own class. And so we'll just pause here for a minute and give you a chance to sort of look over this list and just reflect and think about, are there any things on here that you would like to try or bring into your class a little bit more.
This is definitely not an exhaustive list of quote unquote active learning strategies, but it's a good list to start with. Thank you, Chuck. We would love the phrase pre-work to disseminate itself across the system. We think adding that word pre-work instead of homework really helps students realize why they're doing it. And if we call it pre-work, then as the designer, we have to be really careful about the homework we're giving students, right? It can't just be a placeholder. If we're saying it's pre-work, we're really saying this is work that you're going to do that we're going to follow up on, and it's going to actually help you when you come to class.
Nina, I just want to, yeah, that's a great question. Do students do it? That's a design piece too. Eric and I have had to change when we've used points in our class. We've had to change our grading scheme so that we reward that work, so that students are incentivized to do the pre-work, which is absolutely necessary. If they're going to come to class and be ready to be engaged in the active learning course design, they have to do the pre-work. If they see it as optional or something that doesn't get recognized or validated, then we don't know if they're, some students will do it, but not all of them will. And active learning course design only works if students are going to do the work outside of the class. And for us, that is absolutely crucial to setting up an effective venue for students to learn in.
Joan, I'll just say, I have not solved, obviously, if you're listening to me, the how to talk less, but it's what Kerri said. It's about design. I mean, we all came up in the transmission of knowledge paradigm where the lecture is kind of the hallmark trait of what teachers do. That's how we learned, how we think we learned. That's what we're used to. It's hard, but one way to talk less is to design a class where you're not as big a part of what happens in the classroom, right? Intentionally designing activities, because otherwise we fall back so easily on the need to lecture, and we're good at it and we like doing it. I'm just looking at the clock. I am really happy people were speculating here. I'll just invite anyone who posted anything in the chat that we didn't get to, please follow up with me or Kerri. We would love to network with you.
Eric, to that point of talking less, I'm just going to add one more thought. So Joan, I mean, you can probably tell from this session, Eric and I like to hear ourselves talk. We really enjoy, we used to teach in a learning community together where we would talk and talk and talk every day, and we felt pretty great about it. I think when we moved to active learning design, one of the things that we had to do is ask ourselves, what is the outcome for this particular day? What do we need students to do by the end of this class period? And what can we design to guide them there that doesn't involve us standing at the front of the room and saying all these things? How can we ask questions? How can we design tasks? How can we design scenarios to bring students along to make those connections for themselves so it doesn't just rely on us? We do a lot of just-in-time lecture. So after our students have struggled with something for a while, we come in on the back end and we provide clarification and we fill in the gaps where they weren't able to get. But we're not coming in with our canned lectures anymore and assuming that we have to do all of the work.
This slide is really just a reminder that Kerri and I literally tell ourselves and everyone else that active learning is not about tips and tricks. I mean, we call it like icing on a cake. I mean, you can put icing on a cake, it doesn't really change the cake. Most of us are existing over here, right? This is still the current paradigm where teachers are the sages on the stage and students are typically passively sitting out there. And the class is mainly about transmitting facts and knowledge to students. And, this is a tentative aspect to our paradigm shift, that this idea of fairness and as equality, well, guess what? You can only give one lecture at a time. And so you're assuming that that's fair because every student is getting the same thing. And so it's on them to do with it what they will. Active learning is an entirely different way of thinking about teaching and learning. It's really asking teachers to keep their content expertise, but spend most of their time designing courses and facilitating learners. It asks a lot of students to take responsibility for learning, to think about the outcomes they're supposed to be gaining, and to accept that responsibility. And Kerri and I are at least hoping that this active learning paradigm is really simpatico with this equity paradigm, where we're really thinking about treating students equitably.
So thank you, Susan, for the beautiful segue in the chat. Is the Active Learning Institute open to us? Where can we get more information? So yes, so Eric and I created the Active Learning Institute. This is really how it's set up. I'll tell you about how it's set up, and then I'll tell you about how you can apply for it. And so we run a semester-long training. It's 9 sessions. We meet for 2 hours each session. We have pre-work in between the sessions. And so we try to model exactly what we've talked about in this session. We give participants a chance to, access the content and gain some fluency with that content, and then come to the session where they get to do meaningful things with that content, make connections with that content, co-create the learning in that session with us. And then that experience is followed by an active learning course redesign, where we ask participants to take one course that they're teaching and to really work to intentionally make it more of an active learning course, less of a knowledge transmission course. And it really depends on where people are. Some people are already firmly in the knowledge transmission paradigm, so they're going to try to inch their way over to the active learning paradigm. Some people are already 80% of the way to the active learning paradigm, and they just want a little bit more help getting their class all the way and making some additional changes. And then in the following semester, they teach that new course. And we usually offer some supports, peer mentoring or coaching or that kind of thing during that semester. So Eric has just posted in the chat our call for applicants. And so if you're interested, we invite you to save that Word document that did go out through the system office. I think we disseminated it across the 13 colleges to VPs and deans who are supposed to share that with faculty and instructors at their institutions. We run small cohorts, and so we can only usually take about 15 people per cohort. So we'll probably only be able to take like 50 people, I think, in the fall semester, but we can put people on wait lists and we can offer additional professional development if people are interested in doing more work around this.
This is a very short video clip. This is a colleague of ours from Front Range, a Westminster campus. Before I play this short video clip, as I mentioned, we did not design the Active Learning Institute to close or eliminate equity gaps. That's really something we stumbled on more recently. And so we are not promising, the Active Learning Institute is really not an equity academy. But in this one area, it definitely crosses over with the bigger goals, I think, of equity, inclusion, and diversity. Active Learning can close or eliminate equity gaps. We are not promising that a course redesign through the Active Learning Institute will do that, but our teachers are seeing that, and I just wanted to offer one example of that.
Equity. Oh, here's what I learned. This was probably the most amazing thing that happened. The equity gap we only pulled the numbers for that 1 year, and so I don't know how things have played out since then. But there was no more gap based on anything. There was no gap. Like, this approach really leveled the playing field. So
in particular there, Monica was talking about, I think, Math 107, but Monica also did an active learning redesign of her statistics class, and she saw similar results. And some of our other teachers have seen similar things that match some of the research data that we showed you earlier. Go ahead, Kerri. Sorry.
Well, we just wanted to end by reminding you that we do offer the Active Learning Institute. It has been exclusively offered at Front Range for the last 5 years, but we just gained support from Landon through the system to offer it more broadly across all 13 colleges. So again, if you're interested, we invite you to apply using the information that Eric put in the chat, or you could reach out to us via email if you have more questions or just want to know more about this work. We thank you for taking this time today. You all had such great ideas to share. I just want to acknowledge too that folks who are taking time to come to an equity conference are probably ahead of the curve in terms of doing a lot of this work already. And so, so thank you for joining us and sharing your great ideas.
I think anyone who's going to the next session has like 5 minutes to get there, but Kerri and I would be happy to hang around if anyone has questions, or certainly email us and contact us. If you did not get the information from your school about the Active Learning Institute, it only went out yesterday, so it may trickle down to you, but reach out to us by email if you want to know more about it. Kerri, that was pretty good. We finished right at 1:45. So I guess
we never do that, do we?
Our 12 rounds of practice paid off.
Yeah, right.
Eric, I just want to ask you about instructional coaches. So, you know, the public schools have this, right? They hire public schools. So is it the same type of situation that you guys go through, the training that they go through? Because they do go through training.
You know, so there are some of our coaches have gone to a coaching conference that is typically almost all high school coaches.
Right.
But some of us didn't go through. So it's not exactly the same. You know, typically often in K through 12, you're assigned, it's formalized, you're assigned a coach. Our coaching is voluntary, it's anonymous. And so we work with faculty and instructors outside of the kind of normal chain of command. And so, but we coach people, we do class observations, we help people develop assignments, we do all kinds of things like that. And so at Front Range, each of our campuses has an instructional coach. It's a faculty person that's on reassign for a 3-year term to work with teachers on their campus to develop professional development. Most of it's done one-on-one. It's reflective practice groups. But again, it's driven purely from the standpoint of trying to help teachers be better teachers. As coaches, we work for our clients who are our colleagues. And so that's really what instructional coaching is about. We've been doing it for about 12 years here at Front Range.
So it's kind of, I mean, we do mentors. So it's kind of what we call we have a mentor-mentee program, right? So it sounds like that's the same thing you guys are doing, right?
We do get a 12 credit reassigned. So for 3 years, it is our main focus. And so we do a lot of research. So it's our main job. It's our main job for 3 years. And so we really,
this is not just
it's not on the side. This is our job for 3 years. And actually, like all of this stuff, the Active Learning Institute really was derived, a lot of it, from our work as coaches, the research that we did developing professional development, actually seeing what was happening in people's classes. So mentoring is great, but I think what we're doing is more substantial maybe than mentoring. If you know, Joan, if you want to talk more about it, we'd be happy to. I mean, it is, we love instructional coaching. I mean, it's great for the coach because, I mean, you get to learn so much. You know, we have coached everyone from welding faculty to nursing faculty to calculus teachers to dental assistant, I mean, across the board. And so, I mean, what you get to learn by, you know, working cross department and cross discipline is amazing.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Joan.
You're welcome. Anyone else who is still here, unless you're just hiding out because you don't want to go to the next session.
I had a question. So when will we find out if we were selected for the two?
Brian, we literally just saw those applications that went out yesterday. And so you must have applied last night or this morning.
I applied this morning.
We will, next week, we'll start getting in there. But honestly, I'm going to owe Kerri $50 because we weren't sure we would get anybody to apply. We weren't sure how fast this information would get disseminated. So we will get back to everyone starting next week. We can't promise everyone a seat. There's a limited amount, but I'll just say between us, since there's no one else here, you know, we're really hoping that if you can't make one of the fall cohorts, that you could be on a waiting list for the spring. Brian,
are you at Otero?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's actually a plus in your situation because I know that Landon really wants some of the schools that haven't had as many professional development opportunities, maybe like Lamar and Otero and you know, some of the more rural schools to be represented in these groups. And so I think that's good.
It's very good. And but honestly, Brian, I didn't recognize your name because in between other sessions, I keep pulling up the list, you know, as the spreadsheet builds. So Kerri and I will look at it next week. We'll definitely at least get back to everyone next week and talk about next steps. I am very, very happy that you applied, and I look forward to working with you next year.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Aziz, Michelle, Donna, Yes, email me and we can talk about it. I'd love to. Michelle or Donna, I don't want to close out the meeting. If you're here and you have a question or a comment. All right, I guess I'm going to hit stop on the recording, Kerri.
Okay.
I don't know where it will go.
Probably to whoever's room this is.